In the heart of a lawless trade station orbiting the gas giant Vorax 7, there existed a slaver's market disguised as a neutral commerce zone. Despite the sterile name, its corridors echoed with pain, desperation, and the cries of the exploited. The slavers operated openly, feeding on the misfortunes of war, famine, and displaced peoples. This was where the most vulnerable ended up, especially refugees from fallen worlds. Among the latest arrivals was Yila, a woman of the nearly extinct Lithari species. Her people had been peaceful artists, scholars, and seers until their homeworld was bombed into ruin during a resource war waged by larger empires. With their culture in shambles and colonies scattered, Lithari refugees found themselves hunted or enslaved across the stars. Yila had fled with her infant daughter Nim, searching for food, shelter, anything, but eventually, even hope ran out. Yila was a shadow of what she once was. Her body was weak from hunger, and her silver eyes had grown hollow. But it was her child she protected with every last breath. Nim was too young to understand the horrors surrounding her. She clung to her mother's chest with tiny trembling hands, unaware that they were now property to be sold. The slavers had little interest in the child. No buyers want a screaming brat, one muttered, suggesting they separate the two. Yila refused. She begged them, pleaded to stay with her daughter, even if that meant selling herself. They allowed it under one cruel condition. Her contract would include no rights and no guarantee of survival for the child. But it was the only way to keep Nim from being thrown into the waste bins out back. She signed. The document glowed red, a digital binding sealed with blood. Her hands trembled as she pressed her thumb to the pad. Later, at the auction stage, Yila stood in front of a roaring crowd of alien bidders. Her back was straight, but her eyes never met theirs. Instead, she looked only at Nim, whispering soft lullabies as they waited to be sold. Most slaves begged, shouted, cried. Yila stood silent. Her dignity was all she had left. The crowd was a grotesque mix. Massive Zarkathi brutes in combat armor, searching for strong breeders. Sharp-eyed Varn syndicate traders who bought sentience like livestock. And wealthy elites who simply enjoyed owning something exotic. Lithari women were rare now. That made Yila valuable more for her scarcity than for her spirit. Then, from the shadows of the crowd, a single human watched quietly. Darren Cole wasn't like the others. A former combat medic from the Terran Navy, now turned independent. Freighter captain, he had come here for trade cargo parts, spare fuel cells, not slaves. He hated this place. But when he saw Yila on the auction platform, something in him changed. It wasn't just pity. It was the stillness in her, the quiet way she held the child, the way her voice never rose, even as the bidding started. He saw strength, not BROKENNESS. As the auctioneer shouted bids, the numbers climbed quickly. She was beautiful, even emaciated. Alien collectors hungered for the rare and desperate. 4,000 credits, the slaver called. Going once, going twice, then Darren spoke. 10,000. The crowd fell silent. Even the slaver looked stunned. 10 confirmed? Darren nodded. The other bidders grumbled. Some sneered. But none dared compete. That was more than a noblewoman's ransom. Slaves weren't worth that much unless someone had an agenda. Minutes, Yila and her child were led from the stage to the back exit toward the human ship. She expected chains, obedience collars, orders. But Darren didn't speak. He simply extended a blanket for Nim, offered her water, and said quietly, "You're safe now." Yila didn't believe it. After the auction, the journey away from the slaver station was eerily quiet. Yila sat in a passenger seat aboard the Terran cargo vessel Silverwake, wrapped in a thin blanket, her daughter Nim cradled tightly in her arms. The ship was clean, functional, built for utility, not comfort, but it was warmer than any place she had known in months. Still, she remained tense, eyes darting toward the human who had bought her for an unheard-of sum. Darren Cole, tall and broad-shouldered, moved about the ship calmly. He didn't look like a slaver. He wore worn cargo gear, his hair was a mess, and his hands bore the calluses of someone used to work. But that meant nothing to her. In the galaxy Yila knew, kindness was always a mask for something worse. She didn't understand why this human had paid so much. Unless he expected something she didn't want to give. She waited for the order, but it never came. Instead, Darren offered her food, real food, not nutrient paste, not processed cubes. A heated ration pack with actual vegetables and rice. He gave Nim a protein bar, something soft and sweet. Yila was suspicious. She wanted to refuse, but her stomach growled loudly and Nim was already nibbling. She accepted it. Later, as the stars streaked past the viewports, Yila finally gathered her courage. She turned to Darren and asked, voice low and guarded, "What do you want from me?" The question wasn't just about payment, it was survival. She had sold herself. That meant she belonged to someone now. No one gave away 10,000 credits without expecting something in return. Darren didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, not like property, not like a refugee, just as a person. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 data pads. He handed them over. Yila stared at them, confused. The first one was a Terran legal document marked with the seal of the Terran Protectorate Judiciary. It was an official certificate of emancipation signed, dated, and approved by Darren himself. It severed all ownership contracts, reversed her slavery registration, and declared her and Nim as free persons under Terran law. The second was even more shocking. An application for sponsored refugee citizenship pre-filled, ready for submission. It included housing support, health care, and education access. And Darren had already submitted his credentials as a sponsor and guarantor. Yila's hands trembled. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Darren finally spoke. "You don't belong to anyone." "Not anymore." She tried to make sense of it. It wasn't how the galaxy worked. People didn't do this. The last time she had trusted someone, her entire colony had burned. And now, here was a stranger, a human, offering her and her child. Not just safety, but a future? "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Darren sat across from her and sighed. "Because I've seen too many people lose everything. And no one should have to sell themselves to keep their child alive." His voice was steady, but there was pain in it, something deeper. She didn't know his full story, but there were shadows behind his eyes, the kind only those who've seen war carry with them. Yila didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to throw the papers back, to scream that this was a trick, that it had to be. But Nim leaned against her chest, safe and fed. There were no chains, no threats, no guards, only silence and the hum of a ship going somewhere better. Later. That night, in the small room, Darren gave her soft bedding, a light, even a toy for Nim. Yila sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the datapads for hours. She didn't sleep, she barely blinked. It was too much to process, too much to hope. And yet, the next morning, she asked Darren to teach her to read Terran Standard fluently. Not just to fill out the forms, but to understand everything they meant. She wanted to know her rights, her daughter's rights. What freedom actually meant in a galaxy that had always told her people didn't deserve it. Darren just nodded. No questions. No expectations. Just that quiet, steady patience again. Yila didn't trust him yet, not fully. But for the first time in years, she wanted to try. After Darren handed her freedom and offered her a chance at a future, Yila still couldn't let go of her instinct survival first, trust never. Even on a peaceful planet like New Thessalon, where Darren brought her and Nim to start anew, she moved with quiet tension. The pain of betrayal, loss, and slavery had carved itself into her bones. Healing from that would take more than a piece of paper. New Thessalon was a small, terraformed human colony, a lush world with gentle weather, wide open skies, and plenty of untouched nature. A farming outpost, really. It wasn't rich or powerful, but it was peaceful. The kind of place where the days passed slow and the stars were still bright at night. Darren had built a modest home on the outskirts, surrounded by tall grain fields and quiet groves. He gave Yila and Nim a spare room, no rent, no strings attached, but Yila insisted on doing something in return. At first, it was little things: cleaning dishes, tending the small garden, fixing minor issues in the ship. She didn't ask. She just did them, driven by an internal code that told her if she didn't provide value, she could be discarded. Darren noticed, of course. He didn't stop her, but he never acted entitled. Instead, he offered help, shared tools, gently encouraged her to take breaks, but never demanded. Meanwhile, Nim was blossoming. The child was no longer quiet and frightened. With food in her belly and a warm bed every night, she regained her energy and joy. She ran through the garden barefoot, chasing bugs, playing with a handmade doll Darren had crafted. It didn't take long before she started calling him Papa Darren. At first, Yella corrected her. "He's not your papa," she whispered. Softly, but Nim only smiled and said, "He's nice like one." That moment hit Yila harder than anything since her rescue. She remembered how Nim used to cry herself to sleep. Now the girl laughed and danced in the sunlight. Her laughter was like music, the kind Yila thought her people had lost forever. Still, trust wasn't easy. Yila was cautious with Darren. She spoke only when necessary. She kept a polite distance, dreading the moment when he would finally ask for payment. That moment never came. Instead, he talked to her like an equal, not like a charity case, not like a burden, just like someone who belonged. One night they sat by a small fire in the backyard, the air scented with native flowers and earth-imported herbs. Darren asked gently, "What did you used to do before all this?" Yila hesitated. Then, quietly, she answered, "I was a psionic scholar. I taught children. Helped them manage their gifts." Her voice cracked. It was the first time she had spoken of her past aloud since the war. Darren didn't press. He just nodded and listened. "You still can," he said after a while. "There are Lithari kids out there, scattered like you were. They'll need teachers." Yila didn't answer, but something in her chest flickered. A spark. Over time, she began to engage more. She asked questions, learned Terran languages more fluently. She helped fix things around the community, earned quiet respect from Darren's neighbors. She even took a few refugee children under her wing, teaching them calming techniques and basic mental focus exercises. Her old identity, once lost, slowly began to resurface. Meanwhile, Darren never changed. He cooked, helped Nim with her words, fixed his ship, maintained the homestead. He never crossed boundaries, never acted like a savior. Just a present, steady, patient, and kind. And slowly, Yila's heart began to heal. She realized the trauma wasn't just about what was done to her, but about what was taken. Her dignity, her trust in others, her ability to believe in kindness. Darren didn't restore those things by force. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed, and every time he showed up day after day, quiet and constant, he rebuilt the parts of her that the galaxy had shattered. One evening, Nim crawled into Darren's lap after dinner and fell asleep there, peaceful and smiling. Yila watched from across the table. Her guard, always so sharp, lowered just a bit. This was what safety felt like, not a cage, not a transaction. Months passed on New Thessalon, and for the first time in years, Yila lived without fear. She was growing into herself again, no longer just a survivor, but a mother, a teacher, and a person with dignity. Her daughter Nim had transformed completely, becoming a confident and happy child. Darren remained a constant presence, kind, patient, never overstepping. Together they had formed something sacred, peace. But peace is fragile. One morning, Darren received a ping from orbit. A coded message from a Lithari fleet had entered the system, and it was transmitting a recovery beacon meant for survivors. Yila froze when she saw the signal. The Lithari were alive? She had believed her people scattered or dead. The war had destroyed. Their homeworld and most colonies had been vaporized or enslaved. But this message meant a remnant had survived, a fleet somewhere in the void, gathering what was left, trying to rebuild. They were searching for refugees like her dad at first. Yila was overwhelmed. Part of her longed to reunite with her kin, to help them rebuild their shattered civilization. But another part was deeply afraid. What if they didn't understand what she'd been through? What if they judged her? What if they saw her as broken? Or worse, as tainted for having been enslaved? Darren said nothing at first. He simply gave her space. When she finally asked his opinion, he looked her in the eyes and said, "If you want to go, I'll fly you there myself. And if you want to, stay. You always have a home here. No pressure. No guilt. Just choice." The Lithari fleet landed 3 days later, sleek ships with crescent-shaped hulls, glowing with subtle psionic fields. They set up a temporary outpost in orbit, and soon a delegation arrived planetside. Yila met them with Nim beside her, heart-pounding. The leader of the delegation was Command Seer Thale, a sharp-featured male in ceremonial robes. He had the same silver eyes as Yila, but his were hard and cold. He was accompanied by younger survivors, engineers, scientists, psionic guards. Their faces lit with disbelief upon seeing her. "You survived," Thale said. "And the child?" Yila nodded. "My daughter, Nim." At first, there was warmth relief that another Lithari had made it. But that faded when they saw Darren. "You live with a human?" Thale asked, his voice tight. Yila stood protectively in front of Darren and Nim. "He saved us." The seer's expression darkened. "They are the same species that built the arms factories that armed the warlords who destroyed our home. You sold yourself to one?" The accusation was sharp, meant to shame. Yila's face flushed, not from guilt but from rising anger. She held Nim's hand tightly. "I did what I had to do to keep my daughter alive," she said evenly. "And that man, human or not, is the only reason we're standing here today." The delegation grew restless. Some muttered among themselves. The word polluted, barely whispered, stung Yila like a slap. It wasn't just judgment, it was rejection. Darren stepped back, giving her space, refusing to interfere. But that only made her more certain. Lithari offered to take her and Nim to join their rebuilding colony. But the offer was conditional. Darren would not be allowed to join them. And they strongly advised she leave her attachment behind. It wasn't just cruel. It was inhuman. Yila stood straight and tall. She had once been a teacher, a mother, a protector, and now once. Again, she felt her voice return. "I am Lithari," she said. "But I am also a mother and a survivor. I will not abandon the one person who gave my daughter a future. If that means I can't come with you, then I will build my life here." The delegation stared in silence. Thale's jaw clenched. He offered a stiff nod and turned to leave. "You've made your choice." Yila looked down at Nim, then at Darren. "Yes," she whispered. "I have." The decision Yila made to stay with Darren wasn't just about gratitude, it was about identity, belonging, and love. She had looked into the eyes of her own people and seen judgment. But in Darren, she had seen acceptance, patience, and that kind of quiet strength she had thought extinct in the galaxy. That choice, once made, became a turning point not only in her life, but in the lives of everyone around her. As the Lithari fleet departed, Yila felt a mix of sorrow and relief. Yes, they were her kin by blood and history, but she realized that shared genetics meant little when hearts were closed. The life she was building on New Thessalon was real, grounded, earned. It didn't ask her to forget what she'd been through. It simply gave her room to grow and grow. She did in the weeks that followed the fleet's departure, something shifted between her and Darren. It wasn't sudden or explosive. There was no grand confession under the stars. Instead, it was a slow, gentle unfolding, like a flower daring to bloom after years of winter. Yila started to laugh more. She stopped glancing over her shoulder when she walked alone. She told Darren stories of her childhood, of music festivals, under glowing trees, of psionic dances that shaped light itself. Darren, in turn, shared tales of Earth, of battlefields and recovery camps, of losing comrades and saving lives. In their pain, they found resonance. In their healing, they found each other. But it was Nim who truly sealed the bond. She had stopped calling Darren Papa Darren. Now it was just Papa. One night, as Darren tucked Nim into bed, Yila watched them from the hallway. The man who had once stood silent in the shadows of a slave market now glowed with gentle warmth as he listened to a bedtime story Nim insisted on reading to him. Her voice was proud, confident, safe. Tears welled up in Yila's eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming peace. That night, after Nim was asleep, she sat beside Darren on the porch. The stars above New Thessalon were brighter than most systems, cleaner air, fewer artificial lights. She held a cup of warm herbal tea in her hands. Darren was sipping his own, quiet as always. Then she said it, "You could have asked for anything when you bought me. No one would have stopped you." Darren didn't respond right away. He looked up at the stars, his face unreadable. "I didn't want anything," he said. "Just to help." Yila turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" He glanced at her, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he finally said. "And I promised myself if I ever had the chance to stop someone else from feeling that, I would." That was when she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't fiery or dramatic. It was quiet, born of shared pain and slowly built trust. But in that moment, two souls, one forged in war, the other in exile, finally found peace. They married soon after. The ceremony was small. A few locals attended, along with a handful of Terran friends and 3 Lithari who had stayed behind on New Thessalon. Lithari who had also been rejected by the remnant fleet. They formed a kind of new family, a patchwork of the displaced and the hopeful. Yella wore a ceremonial sash of her people, bright silver and lavender. Darren wore a simple suit with his old medic's insignia polished and pinned proudly. Nim walked between them, holding both their hands as they exchanged vows. There were no grand speeches, no noble declarations, just love.